The blizzard screamed through the pines like a wounded animal, and Patricia ran toward the dying Alpha with snow burning her lungs and hope still bright in her chest. She found him in a clearing where the snow had been trampled to red slush. Dane lay sprawled beneath the skeletal branches of an ancient oak, his massive wolf form half shifted back to human in the way that meant death was close. His pack circled at a distance, eyes reflecting torchlight, but none dared approach. They'd sent for her instead, for the healer whose songs could knit bone and banish poison, whose voice had mended warriors that should have been corpses. Patricia dropped to her knees beside him, her hands already moving to assess his wounds. Her breath caught. The gashes across his chest and throat weren't just deep, they were wrong. The edges gleamed with something oily and dark, and his blood pooled black as ink against the snow. She'd seen infected wounds before, cursed wounds, but nothing like this. Nothing that made her healing sense recoil like flesh from flame. "It's bad," Dane rasped, his eyes finding hers. They were still sharp, still aware, and somehow that made it worse. Tried to shift back. Couldn't. "Don't talk." Patricia pressed her trembling fingers to his throat, feeling for the song that lived in every living thing, the resonance she needed to harmonize with to heal. "I've got you." She drew breath and began to sing. The melody came easily, practiced through 100 healings, sweet and certain as sunrise. She sang life into the notes, poured her will into every phrase, reached for the magic that had never, not once, failed her. Nothing happened. She tried again, voice stronger, more desperate. The song filled the clearing, beautiful and useless. Beneath her hands, Dane's heartbeat stuttered and slowed. The black blood kept flowing. "It's not your fault," he whispered and died. The silence after her song ended felt like falling. Patricia knelt there, snow soaking through her dress, staring at her hands as if they belonged to someone else. Around her, the pack began to move, no longer frozen, no longer distant. They closed in like a noose tightening, and the growls started low in their chests. "You killed him." The voice cut through the wind, cold as the storm. Kale, the beta, pushed through the circle of wolves. His face was granite, his eyes blazing with grief turned to fury. "Your corrupted voice murdered our alpha." "No, I tried." Patricia scrambled backward, but rough hands seized her arms. More wolves, human-formed, dragging her upright. Rope bit into her wrists. "The healer who cannot heal," Kale spat. "What use are you now?" They hauled her away from Dane's body, away from the clearing, toward the dark bulk of the stronghold visible through the trees. Patricia stumbled, fought, tried to explain, but her voice, her traitorous, useless voice, only broke on sobs. Then she saw it, and her blood turned to ice. Carved into the oak above where Dane had died, still smoking faintly in the cold, a symbol she'd only seen once before in her grandmother's forbidden journals. The mark of a magic eater. A curse that devoured healing songs and fed on hope. And it was watching her. The cell was carved from the mountain itself, raw stone that wept with cold and smelled of earth and old blood. They threw Patricia inside hard enough that she hit the far wall, her bound hands doing nothing to break her fall. The iron door slammed shut with a finality that echoed through her bones. She curled against the stone, shaking, listening to the chaos above. Even through solid rock, she could hear it, snarling, breaking furniture, voices raised in challenge and grief. The pack was tearing itself apart. Without an alpha's authority, without that anchoring presence, wolves reverted to instinct. Territorial, aggressive, dangerous. Footsteps on the stairs, then Kale's voice rang through the great hall above, amplified by fury and power. 3 days until the full moon. At moonrise, the healer faces blood trial. The pack will have justice. Blood trial. Patricia closed her eyes, her grandmother's warnings echoing in her memory. Never let them take you to trial, child. A wolf's justice is written in teeth and claws, and healers don't survive it. Time became meaningless in the dark. Hours, maybe. Long enough for cold to seep into her marrow, for thirst to scratch at her throat. When the door finally opened again, she flinched back, expecting Kale's rage. Instead, it was the other brother. Silas moved like a shadow, quieter than any wolf should be. He was younger than Dane had been, leaner, with eyes the color of storm clouds. He carried a lantern in one hand and a water skin in the other, and when he knelt beyond her reach, his expression was unreadable. "You knew my brother," he said. Not a question. Patricia's voice came out hoarse. "I healed him twice before. He trusted me. Did you kill him?" "No." The word was fierce, definite. "My song didn't fail. It was blocked. Someone poisoned him, something I've never encountered before. The magic couldn't reach him." Silas studied her for a long moment. In the lantern light, she could see the resemblance to Dane, the strong jaw, the sharp intelligence behind the grief. "Kale says your voice is corrupted, that you've lost your gift." "I haven't." Patricia struggled to sit upright, her bound hands clumsy. "I felt it. The magic was there, but something was smothering it. Like trying to breathe through tar." She met his eyes, desperate for him to understand. The wounds were wrong. The blood was black. And there was a smell, something acrid that I've never. "What kind of smell?" She closed her eyes, forcing herself back to that clearing, to those final moments. "Bitter. Chemical. Like burnt copper and rotting flowers." Silas went very still. When he spoke again, his voice was careful, controlled. "Dane sent for you specifically. He told no one why, just that it had to be you. He was secretive about it. Paranoid, even. He knew something was wrong." "Maybe." Silas rose, and for a terrible moment Patricia thought he was leaving. But he paused at the door, his hand on the iron. "My brother didn't trust easily. If he trusted you, there was reason." He turned, and in the flickering light his expression was grave. "If you're right about the poison, then someone in this pack wanted Dane dead." The door closed. The lock turned. And Patricia was left alone with the horrible weight of that truth. A murderer walked free above her, while she waited for an executioner's moon. Silas returned in the dead hours before dawn, when even wolves slept fitfully. This time he carried a bundle wrapped in oilcloth, moving with the careful precision of someone committing treason. "If anyone asks, I burn these," he said, pushing the bundle through the gap beneath the door. "You have until sunrise." Patricia's fingers trembled as she unwrapped Dane's belongings. His cloak, still stiff with dried blood. His hunting blade, the leather grip worn smooth by his hand. A water skin, nearly empty. She lifted each item to the lantern light, searching for anything, any clue that might save her life. The cloak told her nothing new. The blade was clean. But the water skin. She uncorked it and immediately recoiled. That smell, bitter, acrid, unmistakable now that she wasn't drowning in panic and snow. She wetted her finger with a single drop and touched it to her tongue, then spat violently. Shadowroot, she breathed. Silas had been watching from beyond the bars. What? Shadowroot. It's a poison, rare, expensive. It doesn't kill directly, but it severs the connection between a person and healing magic. Makes them. She stared at the water skin, her mind racing. Makes them untouchable, unhealable. I've never heard of it. Most people haven't. It only grows in one place. Patricia looked up, meeting his eyes. Nightborn territory. The silence stretched tight as a bowstring. The Nightborn pack had been the Frostborn's blood enemies for 3 generations, their territories separated by a narrow river and an ocean of hate. If Nightborn poison had killed Dane, this wasn't a hunting accident, Patricia said. Someone planned this. Someone who knew exactly how to make sure no healer could save him, who had access to Nightborn contacts, who, she stopped, her throat closing around the question she didn't want to ask. Silas. Who had access to Dane in the days before he collapsed? She watched the realization move across his face like a shadow, watched him resist it, then surrender to the terrible logic. Kale, he said finally. He was Beta, Dane's right hand. They hunted together, ate together. Kale had access to everything. Would he? He's always wanted to lead. Silas's voice was hollow. He disagreed with Dane on everything, treaties, territory disputes, the decision to ally with human settlements. They fought about it constantly. Above them, something crashed. A howl rose and cut off abruptly in a yelp of pain. The curse was spreading, the pack devolving into violence without an alpha's control. Patricia had seen it before in other packs. Once it started, it rarely stopped until blood was spilled enough to establish new dominance, or until a new alpha claimed power. Silas turned toward the sounds, his body tensing. But before he could move, footsteps echoed down the corridor, 2 sets, moving with the confidence of those who thought themselves unheard. They stopped just beyond the lantern's reach. Patricia pressed herself against the bars, straining to listen. Once she's dead, the pack is ours. Kale's voice, low and satisfied. The trial is a formality. And if Silas interferes? A woman's voice, unfamiliar. Then Silas dies too. The pack was cannibalizing itself. Patricia could hear it from her cell, the constant snarling, the percussion of bodies slamming into walls, the wet sounds of teeth finding flesh. What had been a tight unit under Dane's leadership was fracturing into rival factions, old grudges surfacing like corpses in thawing ice. Kale's voice cut through the chaos with practiced authority, each word calculated to inflame or soothe as needed. We need strength now, not sentiment. The weak fall, the strong lead, that's pack law. Through the narrow window high in her cell, Patricia could see into the corner of the great hall. Wolves circled each other, hackles raised, eyes reflecting torchlight like coins of gold and amber. Some bore fresh wounds. All looked hungry for violence. Enough. Silas's shout rang clear as a bell through smoke. The fighting paused. He stood at the hall's center, blood on his lip from some earlier confrontation, facing Kale across the fire pit. My brother deserves better than this mockery of justice. I demand a proper investigation. Your brother trusted a human witch. Kale's sneer was audible even from the cell below. brought her into our territory, gave her access to our secrets. Look where that trust got him, dead in the snow while her useless songs did nothing. She says he was poisoned. She lies. Kale's voice rose to a roar. Or are you so blinded by your brother's soft heart that you'd believe a healer who couldn't heal? Who failed at the one thing she was called to do? The pack rumbled agreement. Patricia watched Silas's shoulders tighten, watched him choose his next words carefully. Too carefully. When he spoke, his voice was measured, reasonable, exactly the wrong tone for a room full of wolves hungry for certainty and blood. All I ask is that we examine the evidence before. The first wolf hit him from the side, a massive gray male who'd been circling closer. Silas went down hard, and then they were on him, 3, 4, a coordinated assault that spoke of planning. Patricia pressed against the bars, helpless, as they beat him with systematic efficiency. Not to kill, but to break. To humiliate. Kale watched, arms crossed, letting it happen. When Silas finally stopped fighting, they dragged him to the doors and threw him into the snow. Anyone else want to question pack justice? Kale asked the hall. Silence. Absolute. Submission. Patricia sank back against the stone wall, her healer's mind cataloging what she'd witnessed. Kale hadn't stopped the attack, he'd orchestrated it. He was using the pack's grief and fear like instruments, conducting them toward chaos just controlled enough to make him look like the solution. Every fight, every challenge, every moment of violence was consolidating his power. By the time the blood trial came, he'd be untouchable. The hours crawled past. Patricia dozed fitfully, dreaming of black blood and poison songs. When the cell door opened again, she jerked awake, expecting executioners. It was Silas. His face was a wreck of bruises, one eye swollen shut, but his hand held a key and his good eye burned with determination. We're leaving, he said. Now. They moved through tunnels Patricia hadn't known existed, Silas navigating by touch and memory through passages carved by water and wolves. The cold bit deeper here, and the stone was slick with ice. Patricia's bound hands made her clumsy, but Silas studied her whenever she stumbled, his grip iron-strong despite his injuries. They emerged into forest darkness, snow falling soft as secrets. Silas cut her bonds with his knife, and Patricia gasped as blood rushed back into her fingers. Then she saw them. At the tree line, barely visible against the pines' figures. Tall, lean, moving with predatory grace. Their eyes caught the moonlight, reflecting silver instead of gold. Nightborn scouts. Watching. Waiting. The forest swallowed them whole, pine branches heavy with snow that fell in whispered chunks whenever the wind stirred. Patricia's lungs burned with cold and exertion, her healer's body not built for this kind of flight. Behind them, howls rose and fell, Kale's hunters, coordinated and closing. There, Silas gasped, pointing to a rocky outcrop barely visible through the trees. The border markers. If Kale was meeting with Nightborn, it would be near here. They scrambled over frozen stones slick with ice, following the river that marked the boundary between territories. The water ran black and fast, too quick to freeze, and on the far bank Patricia could see the twisted pines that marked Nightborn land. Different trees, darker somehow, as if the hatred between packs had seeped into the soil itself. Silas found it first, a hollow beneath an overhanging ledge, hidden from casual view, but marked with subtle signs. Scratches on stone that might have been natural erosion but weren't. Compressed snow where bodies had sheltered from wind and sight. Inside, protected from the weather by oilcloth, documents. Patricia's hands shook as she unfolded them, though whether from cold or dread she couldn't say. Letters written in 2 different hands. Trade agreements. Territory maps with new borders drawn in red ink. And there, unmistakable, Cale's signature beside another name she didn't recognize, but Silas clearly did. Thorn, he breathed. The Nightborn Alpha. The plan laid out in ink and conspiracy. Shadowroot delivered in stages, administered in Dane's drinking water over weeks to ensure the poison was deep enough, untraceable enough. Instructions to summon Patricia specifically, her reputation would make her failure more damning, her execution more satisfying to a grieving pack. And then, after the blood trial, after Cale assumed control in the chaos. An open gate, Patricia read aloud. He's going to let them in. Just walk them through the territory line like invited guests. Silas had gone very still, the kind of stillness that comes before violence or breaking. Cale was Dane's brother in all but blood. They trained together. Fought together. Dane trusted him with everything. His voice cracked on the last word. How could he? Patricia looked at the documents, at the careful planning, the weeks of preparation, the cold calculation of it all. Ambition doesn't ask permission, she said quietly. It just takes. A howl much closer now. Then another, answering from a different direction. They were being triangulated, herded. Silas shoved the documents inside his coat and pulled Patricia back toward deeper cover, but they'd barely gone 10 steps when he froze. More howls. But not from behind them. From ahead. From across the river. From Nightborn territory. They emerged from the trees like a dark tide, dozens of them, maybe more, moving with military precision. Nightborn warriors in human form, carrying weapons of steel and silver. Behind them, larger shapes loped through the snow, wolves the color of shadow and smoke. A war party. Not raiders or scouts. An invasion force. At their head, a man who could only be Thorn tall, scarred, moving with the absolute confidence of an alpha who knew he'd already won. He saw Patricia and Silas on their side of the river and smiled, all teeth. Behind them, Cale's hunters burst from the trees. Ahead, the Nightborn army waited. And between them, 2 fugitives with nothing but truth that no one wanted to hear. Thorn raised his hand. His warriors surged forward, splashing into the icy river. The invasion had begun. They ran through snow turned to red slush, following the sounds of battle like a drumbeat of damnation. Patricia's breath came in ragged gasps, her legs burning, but Silas pulled her forward with relentless urgency. Behind them, the forest echoed with howls, Nightborn war cries mixing with frost-born screams of rage and pain. The pack's stronghold was already under siege when they crested the final ridge. Nightborn warriors swarmed the outer defenses, their silver weapons flashing in the pre-dawn gray. Wolves fought in desperate clusters, Frostborn defending their home with the fury of the cornered, but Patricia could see immediately that something was wrong. The formations were scattered. The defensive positions unmanned. Wolves fighting without coordination, without the unified strength that made a pack deadly. And at the center of it all, Cale, shouting orders that should have rallied them, but somehow didn't. He's sabotaging them, Patricia gasped. Look, he's pulling defenders from the eastern wall, sending them to positions that don't need. I see it. Silas's voice was stone and murder. He started forward, but Patricia grabbed his arm. The wounded first. If I can heal them, if I can get enough fighters back on their feet. She didn't wait for his agreement. The first casualty she reached was a young wolf, barely past his first shift, bleeding from a deep gash across his ribs. Patricia dropped to her knees beside him, pressed her hands to the wound, and sang. The magic came, but wrong. It felt like pulling thorns through her throat, like singing through shattered glass. The song that should have flowed like water instead dragged like honey mixed with ground stone. The wound closed, but slowly, painfully, and when it was done, Patricia tasted copper in her mouth. The shadow root. Even traces of it in the air, in the blood-soaked snow, were interfering with her gift. She moved to the next wolf anyway. And the next. Healing what she could, fighting through the resistance, saving 3 lives where she might have saved 30. Around her, the battle raged, Nightborn pressing forward, Frostborn falling back, the defensive line crumbling under coordinated assault. Silas fought his way toward Kale like a man possessed, cutting through friend and foe alike with single-minded purpose. Patricia watched him dodge a Nightborn blade, take down 2 warriors with brutal efficiency, close the distance to where Kale stood directing troops with theatrical urgency. Kale. Silas's roar cut through the battle noise. But Kale saw him coming. Saw Patricia kneeling in the blood and snow, her hands glowing with healing light. And Kale, who had always been a performer, who understood the power of narrative and timing, made his play. The witch has returned. His voice boomed across the battlefield, amplified by alpha authority he'd claimed through manipulation and murder. He pointed at Patricia, his face a mask of righteous fury. She's brought the enemy. The healer who killed our alpha now brings Nightborn to finish what she started. The effect was immediate. Frostborn wolves, already confused and desperate, turned toward Patricia with snarls of betrayal. The wolf she'd just healed scrambled away from her, eyes wide with horror and fresh hatred. No, Patricia tried to speak, but her voice was raw from healing, weak from exhaustion. Look at her. Kale continued, playing the crowd like an instrument. Covered in our blood, her magic corrupted and failing. She couldn't save Dane because she never intended to. She's been Nightborn's tool all along. Silas reached him then, grabbed him by the throat, but Kale's guards were already moving. 3 massive wolves hit Silas from different angles, bearing him down into the snow. And through the broken eastern wall, the wall Kale had deliberately left undermanned, more Nightborn poured in like a dark flood. Patricia met Thorn's eyes across the chaos. The Nightborn Alpha smiled at her, victorious and cold. The pack was falling, and they thought she was the one who'd betrayed them. The courtyard had become an abattoir. Frostborn wolves fought with the desperate savagery of those who knew they were losing, but worse, they fought each other. The curse of an alpha's death, compounded by chaos and fear, was making them feral. Patricia watched a pair of packmates tear into each other over nothing, watched coordination dissolve into animal panic. Through the carnage, Silas moved like vengeance given form. Blood streaked his face, his own, others, impossible to tell, but his eyes never left Kale. He intercepted the beta near the Great Hall's entrance, slamming him against the stone hard enough to crack mortar. Tell them, Silas snarled. Tell them what you did. Cale could have fought. Should have, by wolf law. But instead he laughed, a sound so incongruous amid the screaming that several nearby fighters paused mid-blow. What I did? Cale's grin was sharp as broken glass. I saved this pack from your brother's weakness. Dane wanted peace with humans, wanted to open our borders, dilute our blood with their politics and compromises. I gave the pack what they actually need, strength through conquest. You murdered him. Silas's voice shook. You poisoned your own alpha. I eliminated a liability. Cale shoved back, breaking Silas's grip with a surge of power that spoke of someone who'd been holding back, conserving strength. Framed the witch so neatly even you believed it at first. Made a deal with Thorn to share territory and power after the weaklings were culled. His eyes glittered with triumph. Everything went exactly according to. A Nightborn blade took a Frostborn wolf in the throat 3 feet from where they stood. The body fell, still twitching. Through the gap it left, Patricia could see Thorn directing his forces with casual efficiency, not the actions of someone planning to share anything. Cale. One of the Beta's own guards, a grizzled wolf named Marcus, stood with blood dripping from his muzzle. What deal? Others were listening now, wolves on both sides of internal conflicts suddenly united by a worse revelation. Cale seemed to realize his audience too late. The Nightborn, they were supposed to help eliminate resistance, then we'd divide the territory. A Nightborn spear punched through Marcus's chest, cutting off whatever he'd been about to say. The enemy soldiers weren't distinguishing between Cale's faction and Silas's anymore. They were killing everyone, systematic and thorough. You made a deal with predators, Patricia said, her voice cutting through the noise with healer's clarity. And predators don't honor deals. They just eat. Understanding rippled through the surviving Frostborn. Some turned on Cale with snarls of betrayal, but most were already too wounded, too exhausted, too broken by internal fighting. The pack that might have repelled this invasion united had instead torn itself apart from within. Patricia finally understood. The curse, the feral behavior, the inability to unify, it wasn't just from losing their alpha. It was from the betrayal of the Beta, the second in command, the wolf every pack member should have been able to trust. That kind of treachery poisoned pack bonds at their root, made every wolf question every other. Cale had killed more than Dane. He'd killed the pack's ability to be a pack. Silas lunged for Cale again, but a Nightborn warrior intervened, not to save Cale, but because prey was prey. The silver blade caught Silas across the ribs, deep and cruel. He staggered, tried to strike back, took another wound across his shoulder. Patricia was moving before thought, racing across corpse-strewn snow, reaching Silas as he fell. She caught him, lowered him as gently as she could, her hands already pressed to the worst wound. Don't, Silas gasped. Blood bubbled at his lips. Save your strength. But Patricia was already singing, pulling magic through the resistance of poison and death, fighting to keep one more wolf alive in a battle they'd already lost. Silas's blood pulsed hot against Patricia's palms, too much of it, too fast. She sang through cracked lips and a throat raw from exhaustion, poured what remained of her strength into the melody, but the magic sputtered and died like candle flame in wind. The Shadowroot's residue, the curse of betrayal, the sheer weight of death saturating the air, it smothered her gift before it could take root. Please, she whispered, trying again. The song fractured, useless. Silas's hand found hers, squeezed weakly. His eyes had lost focus, pupils blown wide with shock and blood loss. Patricia. Stop. I can heal you, I just need. You can't. His voice was fading, gentle with acceptance. You've done enough. We chose this. Let us fall. Around them, the frost-born pack was dying. Not just from night-born blades, but from themselves, wolves turning on wolves in feral confusion. The curse of Kale's betrayal eating through pack bonds like acid. Patricia could see it happening, pack mates who'd hunted together for years suddenly snarling at each other with blank, animal eyes. The disintegration of everything that made them more than beasts. Her grandmother's voice rose from memory, sharp with warning. There is one song that can break any curse, child. One song that can heal anything, mend any bond, restore any magic. But it requires the singer's life. Every note costs breath you'll never draw again. Every word burns away a piece of your soul. By the song's end, there's nothing left. The death song. Forbidden. Ancient. Absolute. Patricia had sworn never to use it. Had promised her grandmother, promised herself, that no cause was worth that price. A young wolf, barely more than a girl, stumbled past, her arm nearly severed, her eyes wild with pain and fear. She snapped at Patricia with blunt human teeth, not recognizing friend from foe anymore. Behind her, two frost-born elders were locked in combat, tearing at each other while night-born soldiers stepped around them like obstacles, letting the pack destroy itself. These people had condemned her, dragged her to a cell, called her corrupted, useless murderer. Kale had sentenced her to blood trial, and most of the pack had cheered. And she was the only one who could save them. Movement to her left, Kale, bleeding from a dozen wounds, but still alive, propped against the great hall's wall. When he saw her watching, he laughed, the sound wet and broken. Your voice failed once, witch. It will fail again. You're nothing. You've always been. Patricia stood. Silas tried to grab her ankle, but his strength was gone. She stepped away from him carefully, moved to the center of the courtyard where blood and snow mixed in patterns like abstract art. Nightborn closed in from three sides. Frostborn tore at each other in feral rage. Above, the sky was lightening toward dawn, indifferent to the slaughter below. She had no weapon, no allies, no hope of survival even if the song worked. But she had her voice. Patricia drew breath deep, full, pulling air into lungs that already ached with knowing this would be the last time. She felt the song waiting in her chest, coiled and ancient, patient as death itself. Her grandmother had taught her the words when she was 7, made her promise never to use them, explained that some gifts were too terrible to give. You'll know when it's time, her grandmother had said. If that time ever comes. This was the time. Patricia opened her mouth and sang. The first note rang out across the battlefield, pure as starlight, terrible as judgment, beautiful as the moment between heartbeats. It silenced everything. Nightborn froze mid-strike. Frostborn stopped their fighting. Even the wind seemed to pause, the snow hanging suspended in air. The death song had begun. The death song unfurled from Patricia's throat like wings, like roots, like something that had existed before language and would outlast it. Each note carried weight beyond sound. They were substance, truth, revelation. The song spread across the battlefield not as music, but as light through poisoned darkness, burning away everything false. The feral wolves stopped mid-snarl, clarity slamming back into their eyes like cold water. A mother recognized her son, horror dawning as she realized she'd been trying to kill him. Warriors found themselves standing over pack mates they'd known for decades, blood on their hands and sudden, terrible understanding in their hearts. But the song did more than restore sanity. It exposed truth. Patricia sang Betrayal, and every wolf saw it, not with their eyes, but in their minds, undeniable as breathing. They saw Kale administering poison to Dane's water, drop by careful drop. Saw him meet with Thorn in the shadows, trading pack secrets for promises of power. Saw him smile as Dane died, as Patricia was dragged to her cell, as he orchestrated every moment of chaos that followed. The revelation hit like lightning through water, spreading instantaneously through pack bonds that the song was actively repairing. Every Frostborn felt it simultaneously, the depth of the betrayal, the calculated cruelty, the casual way Kale had sold their lives for ambition. Kale felt them understand. He pushed away from the wall, tried to run, but his legs wouldn't hold him. He stumbled, went down on one knee, and looked up to find his own pack surrounding him. Not as allies, as executioners. Wait, he started, but they gave him no words, no trial, no mercy he'd never offered others. The wolves who'd followed him, who'd trusted him, who'd beaten Silas on his orders, they tore him apart with the same methodical efficiency he'd used to destroy their pack. It was over in seconds. Brutal. Final. Just. The Nightborn forces, seeing their carefully orchestrated advantage collapse, broke formation. Thorn shouted orders, but his soldiers were already retreating, spooked by the song that seemed to strip away lies and leave only raw truth. They fled back across the river, dragging wounded, abandoning weapons, terrorized by music that made them see themselves clearly. But Patricia barely noticed. Each note was costing her more than breath. Blood ran hot from her nose, copper sweet in her mouth. Her eyes wept red tears that froze on her cheeks. The song was burning through her like wildfire through dry timber, consuming everything she was to fuel what needed to be. She could feel herself unraveling. Each word pulled threads from her soul. Each melody burned away memories, her grandmother's laugh, the first time she'd healed someone, the warmth of summer sun. The death song demanded everything, and she was giving it, note by excruciating note. Patricia, stop. Silas's scream cut through the music, ragged with desperation. He was crawling toward her, his wounds forgotten, trying to reach her before the song consumed her completely. Please, you've done enough, stop. But she couldn't stop. The death song, once begun, had to be completed or it would shatter, taking her and everyone nearby with it in metaphysical backlash. She had to finish what she'd started. The pack understood now. One by one, they stopped fighting, stopped moving, and knelt in the blood-soaked snow. Warriors and elders, young wolves and old, all bowing before the healer they'd condemned, watching her burn herself to ash to save them. Some wept. Others simply stared, bearing witness to sacrifice they could never repay. Patricia sang the final verse, each word agony, each note a goodbye. The song swelled to impossible beauty, reality bending around it, pack bonds reforming stronger and truer, the curse of betrayal burning away like morning mist. She sang the last note, pure, perfect, terminal, and collapsed into silence so absolute it felt like the world had stopped breathing. Patricia woke to whiteness, snow light filtering through frosted windows, clean bandages, the pale ceiling of what she distantly recognized as the healer's quarters in the great hall. Her body felt distant, strange, as if she'd been disassembled and put back together with pieces missing. She tried to speak. Her lips moved, her throat worked, but nothing emerged except the faintest whisper of air. Panic seized her. She tried again, reaching for the place inside where her gift had lived, where songs waited like birds preparing for flight. There was nothing there, just silence. Vast, empty, absolute. Gone. The door opened. Silas entered, moving carefully, his torso wrapped in heavy bandaging, but alive, impossibly alive. When he saw she was awake, relief broke across his bruised face like sunrise. "Don't try to talk," he said quickly, crossing to her bedside. "The healers from the southern packs, the ones we called after, they said your vocal cords are intact, but the magic is, they said you'll be able to whisper, maybe speak quietly, but singing." He couldn't finish. Didn't need to. Patricia nodded. She'd known. Had felt each note of the death song burn away her gift like sacrifice on an altar. The price was always clear. "You saved us," Silas continued, his voice rough with emotion. "The curse is broken. The pack is whole again. I'm being named Alpha at the next full moon." He took her hand carefully, as if she might shatter. "We're offering you anything, Patricia. Anything. A place of honor here, leadership position, wealth, territory, name it, and it's yours." She looked at him, this wolf who'd believed her when no one else would, who'd risked everything to find truth, and felt nothing. Not gratitude, not relief, not even satisfaction. Just emptiness where her voice had been, where her purpose had lived. She was a healer who could no longer heal. A singer with no song. What was she now? Patricia shook her head, a gentle but firm refusal. "At least stay for the ceremony," Silas pleaded. "They want to honor you properly." She stayed because saying no would have required more voice than she possessed. The pack gathered at sunset 3 days later, united in ways they hadn't been since Dane's death. They'd cleaned the blood from the courtyard, buried their dead, begun the long work of healing. When they spoke Patricia's name, called her the silent savior, the voice that fell for the voiceless, healer of the broken pack, their reverence was genuine, absolute. Patricia stood at the ceremony's edge, wrapped in furs against spring's lingering cold, and felt like a ghost haunting her own memorial. They offered her a place at Silas's right hand. She declined with a whispered apology. They offered her a home, a family, belonging with those she'd saved. She declined again. They sang songs about her, new compositions, already spreading to other packs, immortalizing her sacrifice. She listened to strangers singing about the healer who'd given everything, and felt the unbearable weight of being legend when you still had to wake up every morning and discover yourself missing. When the celebration reached its height, wolves dancing, meat flowing, the pack embracing the simple joy of survival, Patricia slipped away. No one noticed at first. By the time Silas realized she was gone, she'd already left the stronghold behind, following the river path toward lower elevations where snow was melting into spring. The forest was waking, Birdsong, dripping ice, the green smell of growing things. Patricia walked into it alone, silent among all that sound, following the thaw toward whatever came next for healers who could no longer heal, for voices that had sung themselves into silence. She didn't look back. Behind her, the pack celebrated their savior. Ahead, the path wound into uncertain green, toward a future she'd have to discover without the gift that had defined her entire life. Patricia walked, voiceless, into the thawing spring and tried to learn how to breathe around the silence where her songs had been.